this year's Canadian Grand Prix has a lot running on it. Not necessarily the running order, but just the stuff around it. And whether or not it would even go ahead. According to those involved, it is expected to go ahead despite there being a reported 200 wildfires scattered around Canada, which has resulted in Montreal's overall air quality to fall to the lowest levels in the world. It does hamper visibility a little bit for the drivers. Not to mention, I don't think it would be great for the cars themselves, as it would result in their overall performance being compromised, as well as, your typical wear and tear. And in an era and economy where we do have a cost cap and limited parts and what have you, this could easily dictate the World Championship if one of the engines went completely kaput. But then again, it might make it a little bit more exciting in terms of mechanical retirements. It'd be back like the good old days. Everyone wants old F1 to come back, then have half the grid completely just DNF due to the fact that something goes wrong with their car. Or the engine goes bang in a big plume of white smoke. But yeah, it wouldn't seem practical to run if you could barely see anyway, and that's just not how F1 works these days. And also, this isn't the first time that the Canadian Grand Prix has been somewhat marred in a little bit of natural event shenanigans. A couple of years ago, I think there were similar issues to do with wildfires, but they weren't nearly as significant as this time around. Then the weather turned the surrounding area and the car parks into a bog, kind of like I thought the 2000 British Grand Prix, and then they had to completely rectify it the following year. It was completely inaccessible to people. Thankfully, that's not expected to happen again at this year's Canadian Grand Prix. For a starter, it's not going to be raining. I think there's only like a 20% chance or something. And, just keep an eye on what's happening in the news, my friend. And if it does end up getting cancelled, there is always Le Mans. And speaking of alternatives, I briefly touched upon the new calendar we've got for 2026. And we've got 2 Spanish races now. Looks like Barcelona survived after all. The Madrid edition will be around for September the 13th. That takes over Monza as being the final European race of the season. And it also means, with the rejigging of Canada being moved forward a little bit, it means that once we do arrive in Europe, we do stay in Europe all the way through until we then go to Baku, which does mean it's a little bit consistent. Because I always found it a bit weird that we would be in Europe and then go to Canada and then come back again. Logistically, it was weird, but that has been rectified. And with Madrid now being confirmed, cool. I think I'll probably go to that one next year because it's so easy to get to for me. Yes, I know Imola is no longer on the calendar, and that is a bit of a shame for all of the classic F1 fans out there, but the overall calendar seems a little bit more sustainable. There are a couple of triple headers in there, but they are right at the end, so from Austin all the way through to Abu Dhabi, with a week break, it's all F1, baby. Other than that, it is just your standard 1 week back-to-backs, then there's a 2-week gap between some of them, there's a 3-week gap between Monaco and Canada, and then your summer break between the likes of Hungary and Zandvoort. I think it's perfectly reasonable, I've got no quibbles against it, and hey, Australia is once again the season opener. Thoughts, folks? I think it's alright. Another thing to keep note of is regarding Yuki Tsunoda, and something that Red Bull has granted permission for him to try out for this weekend's race. I think it's quite safe to say that the situation for the driver, it's not an ideal one. And then it doesn't help that we find out that should Max Verstappen get banned, it's either going to be Lawson or Hadjar that will step up to the plate in the same car as Tsunoda for obvious comparison. It just seems like the media are preparing the obituaries for Tsunoda already. Well, this news that Red Bull is preparing something for Tsunoda to try out at the Canadian Grand Prix is a little bit of welcome news for me, honestly. It just means we might expect something more from the Japanese driver, that it may mean he could get into Q3 and he might have a solid chance at getting some good points, and therefore helping out Red Bull Racing when it comes to the constructors. Even though Helmut Marko has basically said, well, we're not winning the constructors and you can all blame Yuki. Let's laugh at the driver. You cost us the constructors. And this might give him a slightly better chance at surviving into 2026, even though Honda's no longer going to be the power unit supplier. It is to my belief that they would still be financially supporting the likes of Tsunoda Honda, so there'd be some sort of sponsorship situation. At least that's what I think. But yes, the results do need to equally flow, if not more so. And it might mean that we could see an RB21, which looks kind of different to the RB21 that Max Verstappen would be fielding, because, well, they have reverted to Type Red Bull, and they will be basically giving everything to the likes of Verstappen to give him the best car possible, even though that is not kind of what Max wanted, but then he kind of wants it. I don't think anyone at Red Bull knows what they want anymore. But hey, at least they're providing Tsunoda some wiggle room to try and find some more points and disrupt Ferrari and Mercedes maybe. It's a welcome idea. It's not like the team is outright giving up on the season and accepting 4th place. Well, I mean, they can't, because if they want to do that, then that could easily trigger one of Max's many exit clauses. Goal is simple for Yuki. Make sure the team can hang on to third place in the Constructors. But okay, Law, there's only been 2 weeks. Surely Red Bull couldn't build a completely different car for Tsunoda. What could they do within a 2-week break? Well, that is a very good question, and I am not a expert when it comes to Formula One engineering and mechanics and aerodynamic development within 2 weeks, but there could be some little things they could do. I mean, naturally, Red Bull's not going to be telling the world exactly what they're going to be doing for Yuki, and the only person who knows for sure what will be going on that car for Yuki, well, is Yuki himself. But judging from previous examples, it'll most likely be just more hardcore setup tweaks, like maybe a different steering rack, maybe slightly tweaked front suspension that you just couldn't do on the fly on trackside, maybe to provide some extra braking confidence. I think whatever's going to be happening with Tsunoda is going to be involving just improving the rear end and having a little bit more control back there, because having a twitchy rear end just makes you a little bit more nervous. And what is really going to be important to provide Yuki more confidence is that in qualifying over a single lap. And what will really not help is that we are getting the C6 tyre, and that was something that Yuki had trouble in terms of firing up around Imola, and then when he did try and fire it up and be the hero, he then went on to have that crash. So hopefully we won't see a repeat of that again with this tyre returning. And then maybe they could add some gurneys. I think I've seen it in the past where they add a little strip to the top of a wing to provide a little bit more downforce, and it does produce a little bit more drag. But, you know, I think downforce is what Tsunoda needs right now. And yeah, regarding the C6, they might have a little bit more data on it and when exactly to fire it up and when not to fire it up. It's still going to be something that Tsunoda's going to be going into this race with a little bit of trepidation, as will many of the other drivers. It's a tyre that I think is quite safe to say in this year's iteration, it's not delivered in the way that Pirelli expected. So I think they do need to go back to the drawing board at least a little bit. Give it a little bit more life in the tank, you know, so it can easily, consistently at least survive 1, maybe 2 laps. And it might be a little bit easier since Canada, well, there are a fair few more straights. In any case, these changes need to be quick and cheap. There's no room in the budget to satisfy Tsunoda any further, and hey, if they work for him, Max might want to have a look at them for himself. Maybe this could result in a top 5 finish, or probably not. The Ferrari and Mercedes seem a lot more uniformly stable, and I don't expect Antonelli to be as prone to unreliability either. There's no way that this car could wind up with a mechanical retirement again, right? So yeah, I could expect maybe from Tsunoda that he could potentially get at least 8th place, so, you know, a few more points to his name. It's not exactly the ideal fighting the top 5 that we should expect from Red Bull, and it really does go to show that what Checo was able to do throughout 2023 and the first half of 2024 before he lost total confidence in himself, the guy was able to put it on the podium. He was able to win a couple of races in the RB19. We've really got to give Checo more credit here. I've been saying more of this the last few months, but I think I've seen more and more people saying this, that they owe Sergio an apology, which is why the whole thing about him coming back with Cadillac, I think, would be an extra fantastic story for Formula One. So he can actually get some redemption and show what he can do with a car that is built around him and people listen to him. And hopefully Red Bull have listened to Yuki. But yeah, okay, I'm done with that. Another pleasant surprise that is to be had is that Haas is coming out with another special one-off livery. And so far, they've come up with some really good bangers, and even the Miami one, yeah, it was fine. It was a good fine. But this one, to celebrate their 200th Grand Prix of participation, they are going back to their roots. They are going back to a throwback of their 2016 colours, and I will say, this looks very, very smart. Haas are this year's McLaren in that they seem to have a livery for all occasions, this one being the 200 special, and I like it. Not only does it bring back the classic numbering from their first season, it's italicised as well, but the colours are mostly the grey and red they fielded originally, with of course the weight-saving carbon fibre techniques we know and tolerate. And despite this being somewhat quite simple, this is a really smart reimagining of the livery for a modern car, and I must admit, in the original car, it did look a little bit Spartan, but that was understandable, they were a brand new team. But this, with more sponsors, more dips, curves and bends, looks very suave. Now, is it better than the current livery that they have? Yes and no. I mean, the current livery is very much the Haas that we know, and with the Toyota association, it makes even more sense to have. But I really do like the callback, and it really works with this type of car. And I'm really pleased to see it, and it's nice to see that Haas have come around for 200 Grand Prix and they're still going strong, and that they do have an understanding of their identity, since it was just built around the name, the red typeface, and grey. You see Sauber of 2013? This is how you work with grey. It's not silver, it is grey. And it looks great. Whoever's in charge of coming up with these liveries for the Haas car, they deserve a raise, quite frankly. They've all been really, really good. Because I don't think there's been one that I would consider a total dud, right? But anyway, time for the race weekend itself, and Canada, the Circuit de Gilles Villeneuve, is actually one of my 3 favourites. This one, Suzuka, and the Hungaroring, because it's down to the mix of bends, the semi-street hybrid format, and the long straights, and of course, the Wall of Champions. It's got a lot of heritage too, and it's not that much different in terms of configuration since its peak in the 1980s, save for a couple of chicanes maybe. Even though there is a small chance of rain, and of course there's that lingering concern of visibility, the temperature isn't expected to be high, typical for summer. But yes, let's remember, we've got the softest Pirelli combination. That's definitely present and correct. The C6 is back. And many people would be concerned since, we'll probably see the likes of qualifying throw up not that many surprises. We might see a few C5 twists every now and again. But in terms of the strategy for the race itself, it may be incredibly pedestrian. We might get 2 stoppers if we're lucky, but it will be between the C4 and the C5. The C6 would only be privy to those who can sustain the course with them for at least one stint, notably McLaren. So it might be just handing a 1-2 to them on a plate. Or, if Max can really work with tyre management and Red Bull give him the correct tyre and they make sure they have the right allocation for the race itself, then he might throw a cat amongst the pigeons. Well, I mean, he has to if he wants to try and survive any chance of winning this title. And I don't think we need to go over the whole idea of who could replace Max Verstappen, because it was already made clear. It's either going to be Lawson or Hadjar, and then Iwasa will take over at Racing Bulls, and then we might see Lindblad, once he gets a special dispensation, doing a couple of FP1 runs. I did get a little bit hyped when I found out about that news, but I think that's all you need to say. It's simple. Now, some people might be pointing to the technical directive in that there is less flex on the front wing, and that is a valid point because we are going to be having those long straights, and if these wings cannot flex, then it might mean we might see lower top speeds, and this might impact the McLarens at least a little bit, so it could throw some jeopardy, but I'm quite sure that McLaren are anticipating this, and they will compensate in some shape or form because, well, they'll probably have a lower downforce configuration anyway, as will many of the other teams. But I suspect that maybe we might see a slower delta than we saw in Spain of like a tenth or 2. We might see 3/10 or something. And in terms of who could score in the bottom half of the top 10, it might seem, quite standard, honestly. Because based on the previous races, it would be unwise to write off Isaac Hadjar from scoring yet again and adding to Racing Bull's tally, pushing for 6th place in the Constructors. And it'd also be foolish to discount Williams from getting back into the points-paying positions again. Because let's not forget, Canada is seemingly one of those tracks which has afforded Williams a fair chunk of points in their time when they've really not been having a lot of downforce. Let's not forget 2023. When Alex Albon got that P7, he was able to defend in a car which was, admittedly, a bit of a surprise, but it was nowhere near as consistent as this year's version. Alex could easily get another P7. He might be able to get it a little bit more easily than it was a couple of years ago. He might even have a cheeky chance at a top 5 if there's some shenanigans going on at the top, like maybe if there's a crash or there are some safety cars, talks with the drivers and their strategies, they might improve, hopefully. So, top 5? Might be a small chance, but I think realistically it's going to be like a 7th or 8th or something. As I talked about earlier, Yuki could be within the points as well. Sauber are now in play considering that their upgrades around Barcelona seem to work quite well. And then of course there's Lewis Hamilton to consider. Do I think he could be within the top 5? There is a possibility. He might actually be able to outshine Charles Leclerc, who last year, as we know, was not treated well in terms of the strategies, but it all depends on what the Ferrari can offer him. And this is going to be a really important race for Lewis because Canada is the place where he got his first ever Grand Prix win. It's a track which has served him well. It's a track that he likes and loves even. So if he can't pull off a good performance here, this is going to seriously knock him down in terms of confidence. I wouldn't be surprised if he has a bad weekend, then he just writes off this entire season completely, just focuses on next year, and then it's just done. Done as in this year, not done his entire career. He'll just focus on 2026 when maybe the order might change again. He might like the next car. But then again, let's not forget, it's all down to that C6 tyre in qualifying. And many teams and many drivers have been saying qualifying is really, really important. And yeah, thanks to those long straights, there are more chances to do some overtaking with DRS and what have you. But you would ideally like to get most of the work done on the Saturday, so that means you can at least get some clear air, because Piastri says clear air is king. Which therefore means I think it is going to be another McLaren victory. I will get to who it might be in a moment, but simply down to the fact that they can easily cool down their brakes. They seem to treat the C6 tyres really, really well over a single lap, and actually they can get one around Imola especially. They might have even more tread around Canada, and the temperatures aren't looking that major. They're looking cooler than they were in Imola, so this might serve everybody that little bit better, but McLaren even more so. So with Red Bull, I think the best they can try and do to figure is if they just keep up their top speeds, and Ferrari, they seem to be able to turn on the C6 quite nicely, and that means they might be able to figure. And Mercedes, well, let's just hope their engine doesn't go pop again. But enough of the preview and speculation. You want to know who I think is going to be the top 5 for this Canadian Grand Prix? Well, look no further. Here they are. Now, even though Oscar Piastri hasn't exactly shone at the last couple of Canadian Grand Prix he's been to, well, his first two, I really don't see any reason that he won't be going on to win yet another Grand Prix. So I do expect him to be extending his 10-point buffer over Norris, simply for the fact that he's still on a really good high. There's something about this car which gels really well with him, and especially to do with the C6 tyre, because he was able to get pole around Imola. Spain proved again that this car is something that has something to offer for pretty much every single circuit going. The temperature is going to be relatively low, the tyres aren't going to be punished that much, the brakes have never really been much of a problem for McLaren. In fact, it's one of their greatest assets, and this is going to be very important with Canada's stop-start mechanic, because long straight, brake, chicane, then a bit more of a straight, brake, turn, long straight. So it is very much the definition of stop-start. It's not just like a wiggly batch of medium speed, low speed corners, etc. And according to the likes of Andreas Stella, it seems that Oscar's just unlocked another level. So with Verstappen drifting away even more and more, that is going to be a huge worry off the Australian's belt in only his 3rd season of competition. So no wonder, as Andreas said, he has unlocked another level. The only competition he has is the likes of Lando Norris, and he knows Lando Norris extremely well. So it's a known quantity in the same car as his. And also, he's going to be ending up in very rare McLaren company. Sure, he wasn't able to extend the runs of wins in a row, but in terms of podiums, Oscar now has 8 podiums in a row. So he could maybe, I think, easily get a 9th one, which would make him even more prestigious within the McLaren history. And not to mention, when we saw with the safety car restart with him in the lead, he kept his cool, he was able to get off the line quite quickly, there were no issues whatsoever. And we are definitely going to be seeing a safety car around this weekend's Grand Prix, for sure. Maybe even 2. So if we do get a situation where Oscar's near the front, he could easily get the jump on whoever gets ahead of him, or if he's at the front, get the jump on everyone else. Especially since McLaren's strategies have actually been quite stable this year. They've been so much better than last year. Sure, they're a little bit more on the conservative side than I would like, but quite frankly, I don't think it really matters anymore. You know, it's so long as they're trying something and they work and their pit stops are okay, then that's okay. And then in 2nd place, I've got Max Verstappen, because I easily expect him to rebound from the likes of Spain, because that was not a good weekend for him in all respects. Not only did he only come away from that weekend with only 1 point to his name, he's also 1 point away from a race ban. Don't worry, that is the last time I'm going to mention it. But there are lots of things going against him, which means that his rivals are smelling blood. Yes, he is prone to outbursts, and there are moments when he does show that he is not entirely perfect, but I will not be surprised in the slightest if we see some kind of absolute monumental effort that somehow he puts it on pole, like how he was able to match George Russell's pole time last year by having the same exact time. But George got it first, that means he started in P1. And in terms of the speed charts, the RB21 is still up there, and there are plenty of strays, so I don't see how Max Verstappen can't figure in qualifying at the very least, because they just might have to rely on Max's general racecraft to be able to make up for the lack of downforce, and therefore just make up most of it down the straights, because that is one thing the McLaren is not the best at. They do sacrifice top speed for a little bit more turn-in. So therefore, I think that's what Red Bull's got to do. They've got to just make the car as slippery as possible, make it as fast as possible to make up for the stuff in the corners and the low speed ones of that with the hairpin and what have you. And with this C6, Max will have to measure his approach in qualifying, which is why he only just came away a few hundredths away from the likes of Piastri. But I think it would be quite safe to say a podium is very much likely for the likes of Verstappen, because he was onto a podium at the Spanish Grand Prix before that safety car. Being able to pull off a three-stopper in this day and age is something that you should be giving the likes of Hannah Schmitz and company a lot of credit for. It was just unfortunate circumstances it all fell apart after that. But make no mistake, there are going to be things that will be going against the likes of Verstappen, because a lot of his competitors will be realizing that Max has to be extra careful, and he might be a little bit more conservative than he would like in the race if he is going up against another driver. So maybe his nearer rivals might try to provoke the beast a little bit. Maybe the likes of George Russell or the likes of Lando Norris, who I am pegging as a very close third place. Why am I saying that he could be third place? Because even though this may mean he could trail back further than the likes of Piastri, with Verstappen very much in the rear-view mirror for Norris, it's not quite as much of a big deal, because, let's not forget, Lando and Oscar share the same car. Parity is the watchword here. And also, in terms of Lando's general psyche, he's actually in a good place right now. The last triple header was good to him. He came away with some really solid results, and he's managed to get himself back into play, and the guy he was battling last year is floundering, 39 points behind him. And I keep reminding you, if you told 2024 Norris that you would eventually, just in a few months' time, be a few dozen points ahead of Verstappen, then he would have bitten your hand off and said, when, tell me, when? And Norris is a bit of a curb riding whiz, and that's what we saw in Imola 2024. When Max had to be careful on the curbs, Lando had to do no such thing. And around Canada, where you really have to be on it in terms of the curbs, it's kind of like Monza in a way. You have to really have that advantage, and that could mean that if Max is able to get some clear air behind Piastri, then we could easily see Lando and he battling for P2. There could easily be a chance we see a swapsies where Lando does get P2. It could be another McLaren 1-2. But it all really depends on the strategy that Max is able to pull off and being able to keep Lando behind him. Again, it's all down to qualifying for either driver to make the difference. But I do think we will see a mature Lando Norris wherever he ends up, that he will be thinking of the general world championship, because we are not at the halfway point yet, my friend, and he is still well within a race victory of Piastri. So there's plenty of play for, with more than a dozen Grand Prix left to go. It's all about thinking of the championship at large, and therefore increasing the gap between second place Ferrari in the constructors and first place McLaren. They could have this sewn up before we leave Europe, who knows? Then in fourth place, I got Charles Leclerc. And Leclerc is on a bit of a high at the moment. Not only is he besting the likes of his 7-time world champion teammate, he's also been able to outfox the likes of Verstappen at last weekend's Spanish Grand Prix with his cheeky pass after Max got squirrely coming out of the last corner, and then them having a little bit of a tete-a-tete down the straight. But it was an example where Charles came out on top against Max in a season where he probably didn't expect to. It was definitely a positive scalp for the Monegasque, and I wouldn't be surprised if we get some more of that he is able to get another solid chance of maybe a podium, albeit an outsider chance, which is why I put him in P4. And Ferrari seems to be quite good in warming up the C6 tyres, which means that if they can regulate them a little bit more and that they don't easily let them bake off over the course of a lap, which again might be a little bit easier since we have got some more straights, and the temperature is maybe a few degrees cooler than it was around the Emilia-Romagna track, then maybe Ferrari could figure that they could be within the top 5 quite easily. And that maybe it could give Leclerc a chance, especially if we do end up with a problem with one of the McLarens, or if Max Verstappen ends up being not quite so hot. The point is, though, is that Leclerc is in a place where he can capitalise on the maladies at the front, whereas at the beginning of the season, Ferrari and he were in no such a place. But it really depends on what the weather does. If we do get a situation where it's a little bit warmer than expected, then do expect Charles to fall off the back of the McLarens and Verstappen, and it might be a distant fourth. But quite frankly, it's collecting more points, it's ahead of Mercedes, at least in my own predictions, and that could easily at least consolidate the likes of P2. And then I've got George Russell in 5th place, because come on, this guy is so consistent. How could I not put him in the top 5 in terms of predictions? And also, he left Spain under a cloud because you could arguably say that his little tangle with Max Verstappen compromised any chance of maybe going for a podium against Charles Leclerc. That after having that banging of wheels, there may have been some damage, or at least he thought there may have been some damage, so the easiest thing to do was just to bring the car home or something like that. Ultimately, because of Verstappen's penalty, George came away with a P4. I wouldn't be surprised if the likes of Russell, with his ability to manage tyres, as we saw masterfully around Spa, he might try and pull off a one-stopper. As in, go on the C5s at the start, and then just go along with the C4s, hoping there are no safety cars. I mean, that is a little bit of a gamble in my honest opinion, because, as I said, I am not going to be surprised at all if there is a safety car, or maybe two. So it may put a stopper to any one stopper. But I think that's probably what they may try and do. Just go long. It might be able to be a little bit more, because let's not forget, George is a real dab hand when it comes to the stars, because we only got to look around Imola. He had been boxed in by Piastri, and had he not been, he might have actually been able to surprising in terms of maybe getting on the podium within the first couple of laps. So yeah, I think if George can get a clean start and therefore be able to modulate the tyres and there are no foul-ups in terms of safety cars, or if that safety car does come and he can time his one and single stop, then this could be quids in for George. Easy P5, maybe more, but I'm going to limit my expectations for the time being. And speaking of George, even though the odds are likely that he will remain at Mercedes, the lack of a confirmation leaves speculation wide open, and teams open to talk with the Brit. And one of those could be Aston Martin. To find out why I think somehow George is now in play with this team to replace the likes of Lance Stroll, should he be out due to injury, watch this video next, straight after this one.